Cancel the tour, Ray Charles told his shocked manager after reading Belinda Sue Carmichael's letter from a Montana hospital. The 14-year-old girl with cerebral palsy had written that her biggest dream was to hear Ray Charles sing in person, but her condition meant she'd never make it to a concert. Ray's response would become the most expensive single performance in music history. Joe Esposito stared at Ray Charles in disbelief. They were sitting in Ray's dressing room at the Chicago Theater in March 1978, preparing for the second show of what was supposed to be a 10-city tour. Outside, 3,200 people were waiting for a performance that had been sold out for months. 3 more cities, Detroit, Cleveland, and Boston, had similar crowds expecting Ray Charles to appear over the next week. "Ray, we can't just cancel the tour," Joe said carefully. "We're talking about 40,000 tickets, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, contracts with venues, hotel bookings, transportation arrangements. And the band, everyone's counting on this income." But Ray Charles was holding the letter in his hands, and Joe could see that his decision was already made. The letter had arrived that morning, forwarded from Ray's Los Angeles office. It was written in the careful, shaky handwriting of someone for whom forming letters was a physical challenge. "Dear Mr. Ray," the letter began, "I know you'll probably never read this, but I had to try one more time. My name is Belinda Sue Carmichael, and I'm 14 years old. I live in Billings, Montana, and I have cerebral palsy, which means my muscles don't work the way they're supposed to. I've been in the hospital for 3 months now, and the doctors say I probably won't be able to go home for a long time, maybe never." Ray had received thousands of fan letters over the years, but something about Belinda Sue's voice, honest, direct, without self-pity, had captured his attention immediately. She wrote about discovering his music 2 years earlier, when a nurse had played Georgia on My Mind during one of her physical therapy sessions. "Your music makes me feel like I can do anything," Belinda Sue had written. "When I listen to you sing, I forget about all the things I can't do, and just think about how beautiful the world sounds. My biggest dream is to hear you sing in person, but I know that will never happen because I can't travel, and you probably don't come to places like Montana very much." The letter continued for 2 more pages, describing how Ray's music had become a source of comfort during painful medical procedures, how she had taught herself to play simple melodies on a small keyboard, despite her limited hand mobility, and how his songs helped her sleep when the hospital sounds kept her awake at night. "I don't expect anything," the letter concluded. "I just wanted you to know that your music has made my life better, even when everything else was hard. Thank you for sharing your gift with the world. Love, Belinda Sue Carmichael." Ray Charles had been performing professionally for nearly 30 years. He had played for presidents and celebrities, had sold millions of records, had received every honor the music industry could bestow. But something about this letter from a 14-year-old girl in a Montana hospital touched something deeper than professional recognition or commercial success. "Joe," Ray said quietly, "how much would it cost to charter a plane to Montana?" Joe Esposito had been managing artists long enough to recognize when someone had made an irrevocable decision. "Ray, it's not just about the money. We have legal obligations to these venues, to the promoters, to the ticket holders. People have made plans, taken time off work, arranged childcare. We can't just disappoint 40,000 people. What about disappointing one 14-year-old girl who's lying in a hospital bed dreaming about music?" Ray replied, "Joe, I've been thinking about this since I read her letter this morning. When was the last time we did something that wasn't about money or contracts or business obligations? When was the last time we used this platform for something that really mattered?" Over the next 2 hours, Joe Esposito made a series of phone calls that would cost Ray Charles approximately $50,000 in cancellation fees, refunds, and charter costs. The venues were understanding but firm about their contractual requirements. The promoters were sympathetic but insistent about their financial obligations. The band members were confused but ultimately supportive when Ray explained the situation. The most difficult call was to the thousands of ticket holders who would need to be notified about the cancellations. Press releases had to be crafted carefully to explain the situation without violating Belinda Sue's privacy or creating a media circus around a sick child. By evening, Ray Charles and his 5-piece band were aboard a chartered Learjet, flying toward Billings, Montana. The flight cost $12,000 more than many families earned in a year, but Ray never hesitated about the expense. "You know Charlie Hodge, Ray's longtime guitar player, said during the flight, in 30 years of music, I don't think I've ever been part of anything like this." "What do you mean?" Ray asked. "I mean flying 600 miles to play for one person, no tickets sold, no record company executives, no reviewers, just music for someone who needs it." Meanwhile, in Billings, a minor miracle was taking place. Dr. Franklin Hutchinson had received a call from Joe Esposito earlier that day, asking about Belinda Sue's condition and whether she would be able to receive visitors. The doctor had been skeptical at first. Celebrity visits to hospitals were often more about publicity than genuine care. But something about the conversation convinced him this was different. "Belinda Sue, Dr. Hutchinson said when he entered her room that evening, I have something to tell you that you're probably not going to believe." Belinda Sue was lying in her hospital bed, thin and fragile, but with alert, intelligent eyes that missed very little. She had been at Billings General Hospital for 3 months, undergoing a series of treatments and therapies designed to improve her mobility and manage her condition. The hospital had become her world. She knew every nurse, every orderly, every pattern of sounds that marked the passage of days. "What is it, Dr. Hutchinson?" she asked in the careful, deliberate speech that was characteristic of her condition. "There's someone coming to see you tomorrow, someone very special." Belinda Sue's mother, Donna Carmichael, was sitting in the chair beside the bed where she spent most of her waking hours, a single mother who worked as a secretary for a local insurance company. She had used up all her vacation time and sick leave to stay with her daughter during this extended hospitalization. "Who's coming to see her?" Donna asked. Dr. Hutchinson smiled. "Ray Charles." The silence in the room stretched for several heartbeats. Then Belinda Sue began to cry, not from sadness, but from a joy so intense it overwhelmed her ability to process it. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I wrote him a letter, but I never thought, he's probably in concert somewhere important, not in Montana." "Well," Dr. Hutchinson said, "apparently Montana became the most important place in the world when he read your letter. He canceled his entire tour to come see you." The news spread through the hospital with remarkable speed. By the next morning, every staff member at Billings General knew about the upcoming visit. Nurses who weren't scheduled to work found reasons to come in. Doctors, who rarely spent time on the pediatric ward, suddenly discovered urgent business in that section of the hospital.